Can you please state your name and spell your name for the record, please?
Michael Lank, L-A-N-K. Sure.
Do you know who Tim Albert is?
I do.
And do you know who Chris Albert is?
I do.
And do you know who Brian Albert is?
I do.
How do you know Tim Albert?
I know Tim Albert to be one of the younger brothers of the Albert family
How long have you known Tim?
since childhood.
What about Chris Albert?
Yes, I know Chris
How long have you known Chris?
since childhood.
And how would you describe your relationship with Chris Albert?
Chris and I were pretty good friends growing up, right into our 20s. Still friendly when I see him.
Still socialize with him?
No.
When did you last socialize with Chris Albert?
I couldn't tell you the last time I personally socialized with him. I've seen him at events, but Chris and I don't make arrangements to go out together.
What about Brian Albert?
No.
How would you describe your relationship with him?
Civil,
Friendly?
exchange pleasantries when I see him. Hello.
But you're closer to Chris.
Yes.
Have you ever described yourself as being a longtime, quote unquote, drinking buddy with Chris?
No.
Would you describe yourself previously, in years past, as being a drinking buddy of Chris?
No.
Have you ever gone out for drinks with Chris?
Not in years.
Ever?
Yes.
So you've socialized with him in circumstances in which y'all are drinking and imbibing?
It's been many years, but yes.
Your relationship with Chris certainly goes all the way back to 2002.
Again, we were friendlier back then, yes.
Right. Back in 2002 in August, while you were off duty, were you out either drinking with Chris or in some way at a restaurant or a bar with Chris?
No.
Were you close in proximity to Chris when he was out drinking and at a bar?
No.
Was he at a restaurant?
I don't know where he was.
Were you at a bar?
I was.
At some point, did you realize that Chris was getting into some sort of a physical altercation with somebody else in a parking lot?
Yes.
Did you jump into a fist fight in order to protect Chris Albert?
Chris actually approached my vehicle and started to describe an altercation that had been in previously in the night.
When you say your vehicle, your personal vehicle?
Yes.
Okay, so you were off duty, is that right?
Yes.
You had been drinking?
Yes.
Nothing wrong with that, but just
Yes.
so happens that you had been drinking that afternoon.
Yes.
Tim Albert was with Chris, correct?
Not when I saw him, no.
Okay. Ultimately, when you realized that Chris Albert was in some sort of fracas, some sort of fight or altercation, you activated yourself as a police officer at the time.
He wasn't in a fracas when he approached my vehicle. He approached my vehicle and stated that he had been in an altercation earlier in the night with one of the Lapalato brothers, and that during that altercation, threats were made against him and his family, and he was seeking advice because he knew I was a police officer as to how he should go forward. And as I was telling him what to do, that's when a group of men started to walk down Washington Street towards Chris, and he said, "Oh no, here they come." A group of men started to walk down Washington Street towards Chris, and he said, "Oh no, here they come."
So that would be Mark Lapalato, correct?
Yes.
And his brother Alfred.
Yes. Alfredo.
Alfredo, sorry. You got out of your car and approached the other men.
Yes.
You also called for a Canton police backup.
I brought my attention to the restaurant owner and a bartender who had walked out into the street, and I yelled for them to call the Canton police.
Canton police did in fact arrive, correct?
They did.
Isn't it true that after you got involved and Canton police arrived, you then instructed some of your colleague police officers to handcuff Alfredo?
I can't recall.
Isn't it true that after Alfredo was handcuffed and, for all intents and purposes, physically incapacitated, you then approached Mark Lapalato?
No.
You got into a fight with Mark Lapalato, though?
Yes.
You punched him in the face?
At one point after he had struck me, yes.
So your story is he struck you first, and then you punched him.
Yes.
His story, of course, is you punched him first.
I don't know what his story is.
Well, you were sued in federal court, and he told you his story in that lawsuit, correct?
So I actually have a question. The criminal case was adjudicated. The civil case, I did sign a non-disclosure, so I'm not sure if I can speak on that.
I will never ask you what the nature of any settlement within that case was. Just the fact that you were sued in a public document, which a federal lawsuit is a public document, you were sued in federal court over this incident that I'm talking about, correct?
Yes,
And ultimately it was settled. I'll never ask you what the terms of the settlement are. 'Cause that's
it was settled, yes.
Okay. Ultimately, you said that the criminal case was adjudicated. We'll get to that in just a second. Did you testify at that criminal case?
I did.
The allegation that Mark Lapalato made against you is that you punched him, took him to the ground, continued to beat him, and bit him to the point of drawing blood, correct?
I believe that was his allegation, yes.
Then indicated that once the police officers that were there pulled you off of him, you then turned and walked over to Alfredo while he was still incapacitated, meaning physically handcuffed, and spat in his face.
I believe that was his allegation, yes.
Ultimately, both men, after this altercation, were allowed to leave the location, correct?
I believe one fled and the other one was allowed to leave, yes.
Okay. You're telling me now that Mark Lopalito punched you first, a police officer, correct?
Yes.
And are you aware of any circumstance in which an individual would be able to punch a police officer on duty or off duty in the presence of other police officers and just be released? That wouldn't happen, would it?
I don't believe the other police officers were on scene when the fight initiated.
Did you tell them that you got punched?
I don't recall.
They certainly let Mark go, correct?
Mark fled.
Okay. And then
Alfredo was released.
so the next day, Mark and Alfredo showed up at Canton PD to file a complaint against you and some of the other police officers that were involved, correct?
That's what I was told. I wasn't there.
You didn't file a report for assault or battery or anything like that, correct?
I spoke with my sergeant that night, and he said that I could do the report when I came back in on my next day of work.
My question is, on that night, did you file a report?
No.
The next day, did you file a report?
I don't recall if it was 1 or 2 days later.
It's actually 3 days later, wasn't it?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Does it sound like that's in the time frame? It probably was about 3 days later?
I honestly couldn't tell you. It's 22 years ago. I'm not really sure.
But between the time this fight happened and you filed a report, Mark Lopalito and his brother Alfredo came into Canton PD and asked to swear out a complaint against you and fellow officers, correct?
I believe so.
And they were told to go away on that day.
I couldn't speak to that.
By the time they came back to file the complaint, then police reports had been written, right?
I don't know.
Once those police reports were written, after they indicated that they wanted to file a complaint, ultimately charges were brought against them, correct?
Again, ultimately charges were brought. I don't know the exact timeline.
After charges had been brought, and both brothers ended up having to go to court and defend themselves, you ran into both brothers at a mobile gas station.
Yes.
You confronted both brothers, correct?
No.
You approached both brothers.
No.
Isn't it true that you walked up and said, "How you doing?" to the two guys? And one of them responded, "Not so good. You attacked me, and now I've got to go to court."
No,
That conversation?
I believe they initiated the conversation with me.
Did you say, "How are you doing?"
Something to that nature.
And did they respond something to the effect of, "I'm not doing so good because you attacked me, and now I've got to defend myself in court"?
I don't recall exactly what they said in response.
And then, based on that interaction, you arrested them for witness intimidation, correct?
Well, there was further interaction. It wasn't just the response to "how are you doing?" They made threats, and they were ultimately arrested, yes.
So your claim now is that they made threats against you, a sitting police officer at the time. A working police officer?
Yes,
Okay. And you reported that threat to the DA's office?
yes,
And charges were brought against them? I'm sorry. A report was brought against them for that witness intimidation, correct?
correct.
Ultimately, with regard to the assault charges for which they were arrested and tried, they were found not guilty in a public adjudication, criminal case, correct?
Correct.
And the DA's office threw out the witness intimidation charges because they were meritless. Isn't that right?
The charges were thrown out.
And all of this history that we've just talked about came on the heels of you assisting Chris and Tim Albert in a fight they said they had been in earlier in the evening. Is that right?
No,
You just told us that the reason you got involved in this melee, this fight to begin with, was because Chris Albert approached you and said, I was in a fight with some guys earlier tonight, and here they come.
yes, and you just said that he was with Tim Albert. I never saw Tim Albert that night.
My mistake. Let's just leave it at Chris.
He was with his fiance.
Okay. So all of this situation emanated from you coming to the aid of Chris Albert, your friend, longtime childhood friend, correct?
It had nothing to do with it being Chris Albert.
Isn't it true that it had everything to do with it being Chris Albert?
No,
So just a regular random guy off the street, you would have conducted yourself the exact same way.
absolutely.
Isn't it true that what you actually did, Sergeant Lank, in that particular circumstance, was you came to the aid of a friend and you used your position as a police officer to further that assistance and that protection?
No,
That's all I have, Your Honor.
Okay, Mr. Lally?
Thank you, Your Honor. With regard to Tim Albert, what, if any, other involvement have you had with him as far as through your official duties as a police officer?
I was involved in an investigation where we had to take out charges against Tim Albert.
So you've been involved in an investigation where charges were actually taken out against a member of the Albert family, correct?
Correct.
And do you recall roundabout when that was?
I believe it was 2012.
Do you recall who, if anyone, from your department was working with you on that investigation?
It would have been Officer Good at the time.
And that's now Sergeant Sean Good, is that correct?
That's correct.
Same Sean Good involved in this case, correct?
Correct.
I have one slight area to cover with the court's permission.
Okay.
Concerning Tim Albert and this issue, or the investigation where charges were brought against Tim Albert, that was a circumstance in which Tim Albert, in broad daylight, slammed into a parked car belonging to a woman and then fled the scene, correct?
No.
Didn't you follow a trail of transmission fluid or something to find where he had gone?
I did.
And he fled directly to 34 Fairview, correct?
Correct.
He didn't live there. He went to his brother's house, Brian.
No, that's not correct.
He lived there at the time?
Yes.
Okay. So you follow the trail of whatever it is, fluid trail, all the way to where Tim Albert had fled to, and you basically had no choice. He had just slammed into the back of a car and then fled the scene. Isn't that right?
I concluded my investigation by locating the vehicle that had heavy damage.
The vehicle that he hit.
His vehicle.
His vehicle had heavy damage, but so did the vehicle that he hit, correct?
So you had said a minute ago that he hit a parked car. That's incorrect.
Oh, he hit a moving car.
It was a vehicle that was, I believe it was stopped at a light. It wasn't a parked car. It was a vehicle that was stopped.
Okay. Irrespective of whether the engine was running or parked or not, he hit a car
Yes.
with a woman in it, fled the scene, then you find him trying to hide out at 34 Fairview, correct?
He had parked the car at 34 Fairview.
And you didn't have much choice. I mean, there you have it. The evidence is right in front of you. You can't really cover that one up, right?
I would say I did my
Objection,
job.
Your Honor. Move to strike.
So this is Voir, dear. Could you answer the question, please?
I would say I did my job.
Okay. Did you engage in any kind of a DUI investigation?
We spoke with him.
Did you give him FSTs?
I don't recall if I did. I know I didn't. I don't recall if Officer Good did.
Did you give him A breathalyzer?
I did not.
Did you ask him for a blood test?
I did not.
So no DUI investigation was really undertaken, correct?
Again, I can't recall what Officer Good did, but I was there.
But you didn't do it. You didn't do what I just suggested, a full-blown DUI investigation, even though he hit another car and then fled the scene.
We spoke with him, and he gave an explanation.
And that explanation coming from Tim Albert was, I'm really sorry, I panicked, right?
It was something to that nature.
And he turned around, well, I'll just cut to the chase. Y'all ended up charging him with a misdemeanor, correct?
I believe so.
And he was given diversion,
I don't know.
and his record was wiped clean.
I don't know.
That's all I have.
All right. Thank you, Sergeant. You can step down, sir.
Thank you.
I'll hear you, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'll be very brief. In this case, Sergeant Lank's willingness to activate himself as an officer, get involved with Chris Albert, although it was in 2002, and I know that that's something that Mr. Lally is going to say, and he's going to harp on, this was so long ago, that actually cuts against the Commonwealth's case. That shows how long these folks have been involved with each other and how deep their relationships run. For him to sort of deputize himself in that situation in order to help out his longtime friend, whom he socializes with, drinks with, grew up with, establishes a bias and a prejudice, in this case against Miss Reed, and in favor of the Alberts. And it's not like he had a tangential part to play in this, a role to play in this investigation. He was the very first officer to walk in that front door. He absolutely knew what he was going to find when he walked in the front door, which was the homeowners and possibly other witnesses. He engaged in a interview or a series of interviews that were not recorded. I have no idea what was said. The jurors are never going to find out exactly what was said other than to take his word for it. He never should have walked in that front door. He should have said to his supervisors, I have a relationship with the Albert family. I've known these folks for too long. I grew up with his brother or brothers. I've known them my whole life. I'm probably not the right person to make the decisions about this investigation.
If I could turn your attention to the morning of January 29th, 2022. Some point after 6 a.m., did you receive a call in regard to a dispatch that your department had received?
Yes.
And who, if anyone, called you around that time?
Sergeant Sean Good.
Do you know approximately what time Sergeant Good called you?
I believe it was 6:08.
And with reference to that call, the initial call from Sergeant Good, what, if any, information did he relay to you at that time?
Sergeant Good stated that there was a gentleman found in the snow at 34 Fairview Road, and he was in very grave condition, and he brought it to my attention that he was also a Boston police officer.
And subsequent to that, through the course of your investigative work on this case, did you learn who that unresponsive male was?
Yes.
And who did you learn it?
John O'Keefe.
And upon receiving that call, where did you go?
I went to 34 Fairview Road.
And if you know, about what time would you estimate that you arrived in the area of 34 Fairview Road?
I live fairly close, so I was on scene by, I believe it was 6:24, 6:25.
And upon your arrival, who, if anyone else, from your department was there prior to you?
Officer Sarif, Officer Mullaney, and Sergeant Good.
And when you arrived, beyond sort of the other officers from your department, what, if any, other activity or what, if any, other persons did you observe on scene?
When I arrived, I observed that the ambulance was still there. There was multiple EMTs, and I observed some witnesses also.
And with respect to the ambulance, it's your understanding that Mr. O'Keefe was in that ambulance?
Yes.
And did you ever see Mr. O'Keefe on that one?
I did not.
And at some point, the other officers who preceded your arrival, did they direct you your attention to where Mr. O'Keefe was found when they first arrived?
They did.
And where was that sort of in relation to the property, if you recall?
If you're looking at 34 Fairview Road, it was on the left side of the property, about 8 feet from the road.
And in that sort of general area, what, if any, sort of landmarks or other sort of items in that area of the front yard did you observe?
I observed a flagpole. There was a fire hydrant and some brush area over there.
And upon your arrival on scene, who was the first person that you spoke to?
Sergeant Sean Good.
And you had some conversation with him, is that correct?
That's correct.
And then following talking to Sergeant Good, who, if anyone else, did you speak to on scene?
I spoke to Jennifer McCabe.
And where was it in relation to the scene that you first spoke to Jennifer McCabe?
I believe I spoke to Jennifer McCabe right in front of Mark Cruiser 683, which was assigned to Officer Sarif.
And then about how long a conversation was that initially with Ms. McCabe?
I would say probably 8 or 9 minutes.
As far as sort of the other houses on the street, what, if any, activity did you observe with reference to any residents of those homes coming in or going out of their homes?
I did not observe anybody come in or out of their home.
Following your initial call to see back in conversation with Trooper Proctor, what is it that you did next?
Once that call was complete, Sergeant Good and I observed that there was now a light on in the house of 34 Fairview, and we made the decision to then go in and speak with the homeowners.
Now, Lieutenant Lank, once you were back at the police station, what, if any, call did you receive from anyone in regard to who, if anyone, called you once you were back at the station?
Jennifer McCabe called at 9 a.m.
And where did you go following that phone call with Jennifer McCabe?
Lieutenant Gallagher and I went back to 34 Fairview Road.
So this is now the third time that you've gone back and gone inside the residence at 34 Fairview Road, is that correct?
That's correct.
And who, if anyone, did you speak with, along with yourself and Lieutenant Gallagher, once you returned there that morning?
Jennifer McCabe.
Okay, and about how long a period of conversation was that second conversation that you had with Ms. McCabe?
Between 5 and 10 minutes.
And then following that, where did you go from there?
Returned to the police station.
Now, if I could turn your attention to February 4th of 2022. Were you working on that day?
I was.
And in the same capacity that you had described earlier?
Yes.
And at some point, well, approximately 8:50 a.m. or so, who, if anyone, called you on that day?
Lieutenant Gallagher.
And what, if anything, or where did he direct you to go during the course of that conversation?
Lieutenant Gallagher directed me to go back to 34 Fairview Road and meet with Chief Berkowitz as he had possibly discovered more evidence.
And in the time between January 29th and February 4th, had you gone back to 34 Fairview Road at any point?
No.
Now, between that time of January 29th, 2022 and February 4th of 2022, what, if anything, occurred in regard to the weather in between those dates?
So the weather had, the temperatures had increased and there was some rain.
And increased, if you know, approximately how much?
I believe it made it up to the mid-40s.
So well above freezing, is that correct?
Correct.
And with regard to the snowfall that had come from the 28th and the 29th, what, if anything, just in general, had you, well, not in general, specifically to 34 Fairview Road, what, if anything, did you observe between the snow that you observed there on the 29th and the snow that you observed there on February 4th?
A lot of the snow had melted and a lot of the ground had been revealed.
And when you arrived at 34 Fairview Road on February 4th, what, if anything, did you observe and where did you observe?
Chief Berkowitz brought my attention to a piece of red glass that was about 6 to 8 feet off the into the yard.
Now, before we get to that, as far as when you responded, who, if anyone else from your department, responded along with you?
Detective Tim Taylor.
And the pieces of plastic that you observed, where were they in relation to where you had observed or where you had been directed to that Mr. O'Keefe had been found on January 29th?
The glass was in the vicinity of where Mr. O'Keefe had been discovered.
Lieutenant Lank, do you recognize what's depicted up on the screen currently?
Yes.
And this is sort of a further out image of that piece of plastic you were talking about, is that correct?
Yes.
And using the laser pointer before you, if you could just draw the jury's attention to where in the photograph you observed that piece of plastic. Thank you. Ms. Gilman, the next photograph. And sir, do you again recognize what's up on the screen?
Yes, it's a close-up picture of the piece of plastic.
Thank you. Ms. Gilman, you can.
All right, jurors, so you're about to hear evidence of an event that happened in 2002. This evidence can be considered by you insofar as it demonstrates or relates to the credibility of this witness and the thoroughness of the investigation into this case for which the defendant is currently on trial before you folks. You may use this evidence to the extent that you find it credible in deciding whether there was any bias or favoritism on the part of the police in their investigation in this case.
May I?
Mr. Jackson, yes.
Lieutenant Lank, I want to start by asking you about your relationship with certain members of the Albert family. Do you know any other members of the Albert family other than Brian Albert?
Yes.
Can you describe who those are?
Kevin Albert, who is a detective on our department, Chris Albert, and I know Tim Albert.
Are those three individuals brothers?
Yes.
Who is the eldest brother?
Brian.
How long have you known, I want to start first with Tim Albert. How long have you known Tim Albert?
I knew Tim Albert when he was a kid because he was friends with a younger brother of a friend of mine.
Starting at what age?
12.
So you've known
He was 12. I was probably 16 or so.
Okay, so the better part of your life, you've known Tim Albert.
Since about 16, I would say.
And what about Chris Albert?
Chris Albert I've known since junior high.
Which would be about what age?
13, 14,
You grew up with
12,
Chris?
12, 13. I was friendly with Chris from junior high through high school and into our 20s.
And friendly with Tim?
I wouldn't say I was friendly to say hello to Tim. I didn't associate with him. He was younger. He was Chris's younger brother.
But you also knew Chris's older brother, Brian?
Yes.
Back in those days.
I knew who he was.
So you've known the three of them for basically your entire life?
No, I had met them. I had met Brian. I didn't know him other than just being Chris's older brother when we were younger kids.
Certainly with regard to Chris, you would consider him a close friend.
Consider who a close friend?
Chris? I'm
Yes.
using first names only because they're all named
Sure,
Albert.
sure. Chris and I were pretty good friends when we were younger, yes.
I want to draw your attention to an incident in August of 2002. Do you remember an incident in 2002 occurring with that involved Chris Albert?
Yes,
In 2002, in August of 2002 specifically, you were off duty, correct?
yes,
You had been drinking alcohol, correct?
yes.
You were approached by Chris Albert out in the parking lot, is that right?
That's correct.
And Chris Albert told you some information about being in a fight, that he had been in a fight or an altercation of some sort, correct?
He told me he had been in an altercation earlier in the night and some threats had been made to him and his family.
And you got out of your car and discussed this with Mr. Albert, correct?
No,
You just talked to him while you were seated in your car?
yes,
Okay, at some point, did some other individuals approach that same area?
yes,
Was there a fight that you believed was about to ensue?
yes,
Did you get out of your car at that point?
I did.
Did you come to Chris's aid by, quote unquote, activating yourself as an officer?
I got out of my car and I approached the group and I pleaded with them to not fight tonight. I said, there's not going to be a fight tonight. There's 6 of you guys. He's here with his girlfriend. There's not going to be a fight tonight.
Did you come to Chris Albert's aid as best you could as a longtime friend of his?
I came to the aid of a citizen who was in fear and of need.
That citizen happened to be Chris Albert, whom you had known since you were 12 years old.
Correct.
Ultimately, a fight did break out, did it not?
Yes.
And you engaged in that fight.
Yes.
And again, you had been drinking alcohol at that point, correct?
Correct.
And you were off duty in August of 2002 during this fight.
Yes.
Just like you were off duty in 2022 when you were called by Sergeant Good to activate and come to the crime scene at 34 Fairview.
When Sergeant Good contacted me, I was not working. I was due to work at 7:45 that morning. When Sergeant Good contacted me and told me what was going on, then I activated myself and came to work because I was the detective sergeant.
And that's similar sort of activation, using that word in air quotes, a similar sort of activation that you employed back in 2002 to assist Chris Albert.
No.
You did, in fact, call for someone to call the police and get some Canton officers over there, correct?
Excuse me, so in 2002?
In 2002.
Yes.
Okay. And I failed to ask you this, but in 2002, you were, in fact, a Canton police officer
Yes.
at the time. After the other officers arrived, did you order the other officers to handcuff or somehow restrain one of the 2 brothers that were involved in this fight with Chris?
No.
Ultimately, did you see whether or not those officers handcuffed or otherwise restrained one of the brothers that was involved in this fight?
Yes.
And did you then engage physically in a fight with the other brother who was not restrained?
No. The struggle had already occurred.
All right. So let me make sure I get the timing right. You did, in fact, engage in a physical fight with one of the brothers, correct?
Upon being struck, yes.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Upon being struck, yes.
And then you struck him back.
Yes.
You ended up on the ground.
Yes, we were wrestling, yes.
And ultimately, the other officers had to pull you off that man, correct?
No.
You ultimately, the fight was broken up between you and the other brother. Is that right?
That's correct.
All right. And that fight was broken up by the officers who were on scene.
Yes.
All right. After this physical altercation with the brother who was not ultimately restrained, both of the brothers and everybody else was just told by the officers, just go away. Get out of here, go home, correct?
No, I believe one of the brothers left the scene, fled the scene, and the brother that was restrained was ultimately uncuffed and left free to go.
And nobody was arrested that night.
Correct.
Nobody chased down the brother that left the scene, correct?
That's correct.
And nobody arrested the brother that had been handcuffed.
Correct.
And no police reports were written by you or any of the other officers about this incident on that night.
I don't recall when the other officers wrote theirs. I did not write mine on that night.
The next day, you became aware that one or both of the brothers had arrived at Canton Police Department to file a formal complaint for having been physically attacked by you and some of the other officers involved, correct?
I don't recall when I was made aware that they had come down to the police station.
You are aware that there was a complaint sought against you for the physical attack that was alleged to have occurred, correct?
It was brought to my attention that they had come down to the police station.
And you also are aware that only after that complaint had been sought, the police reports were then dated and filed against the 2 brothers, correct?
So I had spoken to the sergeant on duty the night of the
Yes or
incident.
no question. I'm just looking at the time.
It's not a yes or no question.
So he was just asking you about dates. So can you answer the question? Ask the question
Could you
about the
repeat?
dates again, please.
I'm seeking the chronology of events. The fight occurs, a complaint against you occurs, and then police reports are filed against the 2 people that are complaining against you. Is that the chronology?
Yes.
And you're also aware that although he had been in a physical fight that night, no charges were ever brought against Chris Albert, correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
Do you know that?
I don't know. I don't even know where the fight occurred.
Officer Lank, what we just talked about, is that an example of you using your position as a police officer to come to the aid of one of the members of the Albert family?
It was me coming to the aid of a citizen who was terrified and scared for him and his family on that night.
Who happened to be
Who happened-
named what?
Excuse me, who happened to be Chris Albert.
You mentioned Kevin Albert. Who is he?
Kevin Albert is a detective with the Canton Police.
Is he a coworker?
Yes,
How long have you known him?
probably since 14, 15 years old.
And you also consider him to be a friend as well as a coworker
I do,
and a colleague.
yes.
And you're also well aware. I mean, you've said it already. He's the little brother of Brian Albert.
Correct.
And you're also aware that the reason that your department was ultimately recused from this investigation, Lieutenant Lank, is because of a perceived bias or conflict of interest between the Albert family and the Canton Police Department, correct?
Yes, there was a perceived bias.
Okay. Can you tell me one more time, now I want to fast forward to the incident in question. What was the exact time that you arrived at the location, if you know?
I believe it was around 6:24, 6:25.
Okay. And you indicated that that was in response to a call that you got from Sergeant Good.
Yes, that's correct.
What made you decide, or could you have decided, to take this particular call? Was it up to you, in other words?
I would never not take that call.
Okay, fair enough. So once you got the call, you knew that you were going to respond because there was something very serious afoot.
Correct.
Did you know at the time you got the call that that very serious incident was occurring at 34 Fairview?
No.
When did you realize that?
Upon speaking with Sergeant Good.
Okay, so Sergeant Good didn't, I guess that's what maybe I asked an inartful question. I was asking whether or not Sergeant Good told you before you actually arrived, he sort of had to have, that it's at 34 Fairview.
He did.
Okay. At that point, did a light bulb go off and you think to yourself, ding, that's the Albert House?
I don't recall if I realized it then or once I turned onto the street. I don't recall.
At some point before your car came to a stop, you knew this is 34 Fairview, this is the Albert household.
I knew that was Brian Albert's house, yes.
When you arrived, who was the ranking officer at the scene? You mentioned, obviously we've heard these names, Sergeant Good, there's Officer Mullaney, there's Officer Seraph, you. Who was the ranking officer?
When I arrived, Sergeant Good was the ranking officer.
Did you have a dash cam in the vehicle that you arrived in?
I did not.
And that's because was that a detective vehicle?
Yes.
Sometimes used undercover, etc.?
Yes.
So it's not a fully marked cruiser.
No, not at all.
The other cruisers you're aware did have dash cams, correct?
Yes.
Have you reviewed any or all of those dash cams from Officer Mullaney, Officer Seraph, Sergeant Good?
Yes.
And you reviewed those in preparation for your testimony?
Yes.
Do you recognize either or both of those images?
Yes.
How do you recognize them?
It looks like the scene from that morning. The top one anyway is 683, Officer Seraph's cruiser.
And the bottom one?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Looks like possibly Sergeant Good's based on where it's placed.
Okay. At some point, did you see Ms. McCabe leave your presence and walk toward the driveway?
Once the conversation had terminated, I honestly don't recall where she went.
Did she tell you that she intended to go inside the house?
I had said to her that at some point we're going to need to speak to Brian and Nicole
Why did you think it was important to speak to Brian and Nicole?
because it's their property.
And somebody was laying in the snow, unconscious and unresponsive, correct?
Correct.
And obviously that could potentially, at least, implicate people inside the house.
Based on my conversation with Ms. McCabe, she had stated that the intention was for Mr. McCabe, for Mr. O'Keefe to join them at that house, so I wanted to get statements from everybody who was there.
Find out what happened, correct?
Correct.
I mean, that's sort of the obvious initial point of an investigation. Find out who the witnesses are and interview all of them, correct?
Correct.
And you began by talking to Ms. McCabe,
Yes.
knowing that she was a potential witness at least, correct?
She identified herself as a friend of Mr. O'Keefe.
Who had been with Mr. O'Keefe just hours before.
Yes.
He ended up laying in the snow fighting for his life, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you also knew that there were other witnesses potentially inside the house because she just told you that, right?
I knew that that was ultimately where he was supposed to end up. She identified herself as a friend of Mr. O'Keefe.
Who had been with Mr. O'Keefe just hours before.
Yes.
He ended up laying in the snow fighting for his life, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you also knew that there were other witnesses potentially inside the house because she just told you that, right?
I knew that that was ultimately where he was supposed to end up. I knew that that was ultimately where he was supposed to end up.
So if there were other witnesses in the house, if there were other individuals in the house, they also were potential witnesses.
Potentially.
And Ms. McCabe indicated, I'm going to go in the house, correct?
I had told her that she's going to have to wake her sister up because we're going to need to speak with them.
You didn't think that it was more important to separate the witnesses and not let her talk to other witnesses?
No.
You thought that it was appropriate to let all the witnesses get together and just discuss the facts before you had an opportunity to interview them separately?
Objection.
Sustained as to the form.
Stop. Did you see anything occur at or around the car in the distance?
It appears to be somebody walking towards the house.
Was that Jen McCabe?
I can't say for sure.
Do you see yourself, by the way, in this video?
Yes.
Where are you?
Right here.
Okay. You did notice that several minutes after Jen McCabe went in the house, and while you were on that phone call, the lights finally came on at 34 Fairview, correct?
Correct.
At the point the lights came on, the ladder truck had already gone, left from the scene, correct? The fire engine.
I believe so.
The firefighters are all gone.
Yes.
The ambulance has already left and transported Mr. O'Keefe.
Yes.
The paramedics are gone, the EMTs.
Yes.
Fire captain and his SUV, that's gone. Is that right?
I'm sorry, was there a question?
The fire captain and his SUV, that's gone.
I'm not sure.
In other words, all the fire and EMTs have...
I don't see them on camera.
Doesn't appear that any fire or EMTs are still on scene, correct?
Doesn't appear so.
Carrie Roberts is gone.
Yes.
Karen Reed is gone.
Yes.
So when the only parties left at the scene are members of the Albert family, Jen McCabe, and the Canton Police Department representatives, that's when the lights inside 34 Fairview finally came on.
Okay.
Is that yes?
Yes.
And then minutes after that call, you did then speak to to dispatch, correct?
CPAC dispatch.
Right, I was getting to that. It was a dispatch, and the dispatch was to CPAC, not to Canton PD.
Correct.
And at some point, did CPAC dispatch indicate that they were on their way, they had declined the call? What was that call all about?
So there are two separate calls.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Who did you talk to at CPAC?
I don't recall who handled the first call at dispatch.
Okay, do you remember having a conversation with Kelly Dever?
No.
Okay.
I think we're talking about two different things. I'm talking about CPAC dispatch, not Canton Police Dispatch.
Okay, fair enough. At some point, did you have a conversation with, well, let me ask it this way. I just don't know. Did you talk to both Canton Dispatch and CPAC Dispatch?
I definitely spoke to CPAC Dispatch.
And okay.
I'm not sure if I spoke to Canton Dispatch or not.
All right. At some point, did you say, did you indicate to one or the other, I'm responding to 34 Fairview, we have a Boston police officer who was just found?
I stated that I was already at 34 Fairview.
You indicated
I
that he
believe.
does have some trauma to his head area, correct?
That's correct.
And you said, quote, I'm not sure if he's been in a fight or whatever. Our medics don't believe he's going to make it,
Correct.
end quote. Sergeant Lank, you never saw John O'Keefe's body, correct?
Correct.
So somebody disclosed to you that it appeared that he had been in a, quote, fight or whatever, at least at that point. That was your thought.
No.
And what made you say, well, you didn't say to dispatch, the victim appears to have been shot, correct?
Correct.
You didn't say it appeared that he'd been stabbed.
No.
He had been strangled.
No.
You didn't say it appeared he'd been hit by a car.
Correct.
You said it appeared that he'd been in a fight or whatever, correct?
I stated that he had some trauma to his head, and I said, I don't know if he has been in a fight, and then I believe I described it as I don't remember my exact terminology, but it was a crazy scene.
Chaotic scene?
Possibly. I don't recall my exact words, something to that effect.
But you do recall your exact words to dispatch being, I don't know if he's been in a fight or whatever.
Correct.
Okay. I want to talk about inside the house for just a few minutes, if I could. You've talked extensively about the crime scene outside, and we'll get to that in a second, but I want to talk about what did or did not happen inside the house. Did you actually make it inside the house at some point?
Yes.
Okay. When was that? How long? Let's use Jennifer McCabe as the time frame. How long after that did you finally go inside the house, after she'd been in the house?
So it was specifically just after I got off the phone with CPAC.
So just a few minutes after we ended that video.
Yes.
And you walked you said either along the driveway or through the yard.
I believe it was up the driveway.
Okay. Once you went in the house, you made contact with the individuals in the house, correct?
Yes.
And you believed, at least at that point, that there was a potential that there was a, let me rephrase that. You knew that you were dealing with a violent incident, correct?
No.
You thought maybe it was just a heart attack?
I didn't know what it was. At that point in time, I didn't know what it was. Could have been a multitude of things.
But what was going through your mind at that point was it could have been a fight or whatever, because he had trauma to his head. Those were your words.
Those were my words, yes.
Okay. So you didn't think it was like some old man who died of old age, right?
Based on his age, no, I wouldn't have suspected that.
You didn't think it was an accidental drowning or something?
Again, it could have been a multitude of things that caused those injuries. So at that point in time, we had no idea what we were looking at.
But you were aware that it had something to do with a violent incident. He had trauma to his face and he's unconscious, correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Did you believe that there were any indicators that Mr. O'Keefe had been involved in some sort of a physical altercation?
Possibly.
Okay. And that's because you used the phrase, he had trauma to his face and head, right?
That's what I had been told, yes.
So based on what you had been told, you knew that there was a person laying out unconscious just outside a residence that may have been involved in a physical altercation. That's fair.
It's a possibility, yes. But again, there were a multitude of things that were going through my head as possibilities.
But that's one of the premier possibilities, right?
I wouldn't say it's premier, it was one of the possibilities.
And it's logical to believe that if a fight had occurred, very well may have started inside the residence 30 feet away.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Did you believe in your mind that it was possible, given the fact that a violent confrontation was possible in your mind, that it could have started inside the house?
Objection.
Sustained.
May we approach?
Yes.
Given what you believed at the time and the possibility that there was a fight or whatever, did you logically think in your mind, your state of mind was it possibly could have started in the house,
If it had been a confrontation, it could have started anywhere.
right? The house is part of anywhere, right?
Correct.
So in other words, the house is not excluded in your mind at that point as a starting point for the investigation. Is that right?
Well, the starting point would have been where Mr. O'Keefe had been discovered, and then based on speaking with the witnesses, there was no indication that he had ever made it into the house.
Well, you didn't know that until you followed up on your investigation, correct?
I learned that by speaking to Ms. McCabe.
So you just took Ms. McCabe's word for it.
At that point in time, that was the only person I had spoken to, and she gave me a timeline of events from that night where Mr. O'Keefe was supposed to come back to the house, but never made it.
Have you ever been, in your course of investigating cases, have you ever been lied to by a witness?
Objection, Your Honor.
Can you answer that? Have you ever been lied to by a witness?
Yes.
So it's not necessarily the best investigative technique to just take a witness's word for something, correct?
Objection.
That's sustained.
You need to actually investigate the circumstances for yourself and to your own satisfaction. Is that a fair statement?
Sure.
One of those investigative techniques would be to walk into the house and figure out who's who there, correct?
Can you rephrase the question?
Sure. One of those investigative techniques to satisfy yourself that you're actually getting to the truth of the matter would be to walk into the house and figure out who's in the house first.
I will agree that I needed to speak to the people in the home. I can't just walk in their house. I have to announce myself, and they don't have to let me in.
I understand. I'm not trying to parse those words. I just mean entering the home and interviewing witnesses. That would be a normal part of your investigation initially, correct?
Yes.
And you also knew that the most obvious place to look for witnesses that may have information about a fallen man in the snow would be 30 feet away in the home, correct?
Correct.
So once you're inside the residence, you walked in the front door, correct?
Yes.
You indicated that there's a stair that services the second floor. Is that right?
Straight ahead, yes.
Right. Just before the staircase, there's a door to your left, right?
I don't recall.
You remember whether or not there's a door that when you open it, goes directly downstairs to the basement?
I don't recall.
You indicated on direct examination that you didn't notice anything. I'm paraphrasing, so forgive me. You didn't notice anything out of place in the home.
No.
But you didn't go downstairs to the basement and look, did you?
No.
Didn't look for broken furniture down there.
I didn't enter the basement at all.
You didn't look for torn clothing down there.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
How about anywhere in the house? Did you look for broken furniture or torn clothing or blood evidence or DNA evidence?
At that point in time, I never made it past the front foyer area.
So the answer to my question is no, you did not.
I never made it past the front foyer area.
So if I were to ask you one more time, I know you never made it past the foyer. Did you ever investigate the foyer area or any other part of the house for evidence of a fight?
The only area I was able to observe at that point, everything appeared to be in order.
But you didn't search the rest of the house for a fight, Lieutenant. That's all I'm asking.
No, I wouldn't have had probable cause to do so.
And did you seek guidance from a court as to whether or not you might have probable cause?
Do you mean a search warrant?
That's what I mean.
I wouldn't fill out an affidavit for a search warrant because it wouldn't have probable cause.
In your mind, there was no PC to search that house, right?
Objection.
Let's move on from this.
Would you consider electronic devices relatively vital in modern law enforcement investigations?
I'm sorry, violent?
Vital.
Yes,
Critical.
yes.
Right? They're critical items of evidence, right?
Yes.
It's like walking around with your entire life in your palm of your hand, correct?
Correct.
Did you seek to secure any electronic devices from any of the occupants of that house that morning?
No.
Did you ask for consent to look through their electronic devices, for instance, their cell phones, for text messages or communications?
No.
Did you ever, in fact, notify any of your superiors at Canton PD or any other law enforcement agency that you had a personal relationship with the Albert family or members of the Albert family?
I did not.
Mayor, Your Honor.
Yes.
Very briefly, Lieutenant Lank, you indicated that you claimed in your description that you were assaulted by the Lopalito brothers, correct?
Yes.
The fact is, they were never convicted of anything having to do with this case, the case that you're describing. Isn't that true?
Correct.
You also indicated that they made either a threatening comment to you or a disparaging comment to you about, I don't give a fuck, correct?
Correct.
Isn't it true that what was actually said was you said to them, I don't know who you are, but I'm going to make your life miserable?
No.
All of this incident was in furtherance of you protecting a member of the Albert family when they asked for your help, correct?
No, it was me protecting someone who asked for my help who was clearly in fear.
Who happened to be in Albert.
Happened to be an Albert.
Thank you.
All right, you are all set. Thank you. Lieutenant, you're all set, sir.